Hi, I'm Trevor Price and thanks for tuning in. This video is all about performing well in exams, whether it's online exams or you're facing a physical examination in a physical venue such as an exam hall or a classroom. So the first thing to do is when you enter the exam venue or you're logging in and starting the exam online is to make sure you read all the instructions to candidates very, very carefully and make sure that you follow those instructions to the letter. If you don't, you could jeopardize your ability to score highly during that exam because perhaps you don't answer the correct number of questions, or you don't answer them in the correct sequence that's required, or you fail to abide by other instructions that the examiner wants you to follow. The second thing is to quickly read all the questions that are available in that exam for you to answer. So you might have a choice to choose from a number of questions, those that you answer, or you might have to answer all the questions in that exam, all the exam questions that are presented in the paper to you. Whilst you quickly read, and I'm talking very briefly, only spending 5 or 6 minutes right at the beginning of the exam to look through all those questions. As you read through those questions, briefly make some key notes and try and rate those questions in terms of the ones that you think are really easy to answer and those that you think are really difficult to answer. This helps you because you can answer the questions that you feel are easiest first, and this gives you confidence because you no longer will be looking at a blank piece of paper or a blank screen on your computer, and you've already hopefully gained some marks in that exam. The third point is don't leave the exam before it has officially finished, because this is really useful time you have available, if there's spare time at the end of the exam, to do some final last-minute checks. And these checks could gain you some marks. So for example, go back and make sure that you really have correctly followed the exam procedures and that you've done everything that is required of you to get the highest marks in that exam and have made it easy for the examiner to give you those marks. So for example, make sure that your name and perhaps your student ID number is written on every sheet of paper and on every file that you have to upload into the exam system if you're doing that online. This makes sure that the examiner can allocate marks to the right person. It sounds obvious, but some students in that very stressful examination situation forget to do that. And there's nothing worse from the examiner's point of view. Perhaps you have collected the exam papers from a physical classroom and perhaps you've tripped up and you've dropped those papers on the floor and there's bits of papers with answers all over the place. Well, if it's not clear who those answers have been written by, then things can go awry there. Make sure that you've answered all parts of the questions asked of you in detail sufficiently. So for example, questions might be split into smaller parts. Go back if you've got time at the end of the exam and make sure that you've answered all of those parts adequately and to your fullest ability. Make sure if you're handwriting an exam that your handwriting is legible. If the examiner can't read it or is finding it very difficult to read, then obviously that's going to cause a few problems. If it can't be read, you can't gain marks for that answer. Check also your spelling, the syntax of your answers, the grammar, and importantly, any referencing that is required in those answers. Those are very, very common errors, and it kind of degrades the quality of your work, and you might lose a few marks, especially if the exam requires good spelling and good grammar. But more importantly than that, if the grammar and spelling makes it so difficult for the examiner to actually understand your answer, then your grades will suffer as a result. Also, read your answers carefully, because our brains work at a different speed to our hands when we're typing answers or handwriting answers in an exam. And what we think we've written, what we've actually written, is something quite different to what we think we have written. So it's worth going back and reading the answers that you have put down on the paper or on the screen, to just make sure that firstly it makes sense to you and is what you intended that answer to be. Also, by doing that, you can check the syntax and the spelling and the grammar, but also check the understanding of the answer that you have written. Does it make sense? Is it what you intended that answer to be? Are you sure that somebody else, when they're reading that answer, can understand your meaning in that answer? Also, review any questions that you thought were really difficult. Perhaps you've had to skip them because you've answered the easiest questions first, and now you're left with all those difficult questions that you're finding really troublesome to grapple with. Well, during the end period of the exam, go back to those difficult questions and do your best. Think about, hopefully you've got time to think about answering those questions, or at least having a guess and trying your best to answer those questions. And that brings me on to the final point, really. Guessing an answer is better than no answer at all. Because if you think about it, a blank answer with nothing there at all will only gain a 0. If you've at least guessed and you've scribbled something in the last minute, or you've just downloaded whatever's in your brain and have put an answer as your best estimate of the answer, then at least you stand a chance of gaining a mark or two if you've hit the right keywords and the examiner is feeling not generous but kind, and looking through your rough notes here at the end and spots a few keywords where the examiner can legitimately give you some marks. And that just might be the difference between failing the exam and passing the exam, or hopefully a first class or a second class grade as a result of those last minute thoughts. Also, of course, your brain's had time to think about the question subconsciously, and whether you realize it or not, you might be able to go back to those difficult questions at the end of the exam, those that you've left blank, or you thought, I'm not really so comfortable with the answers I wrote there, and you might just come up with a much better, much more refined, much better focused answer as a consequence of that time that your brain has had to subconsciously think about it as you were writing and working on the other questions in the exam. Make sure also that you submit the paper correctly, or you submit the file correctly at the end of the exam period. If you're using online exam software provided for by the university that you've had to download and use in preparing your answers for that exam, then that software will probably upload your answers automatically, or it will just stop you being able to type anymore once the time deadline has up. So good luck with your exam preparation, and good luck with your performance in the exam. If you've liked this film, there's lots more help available in my First Class University channel. There's some links coming up on the screen right now. Have a look around. There's a lot of study skills videos on this channel about essay writing, writing assignments, exam preparation, of course, but things like how to do research, how to reference, the difference between essays and report writing, all useful stuff for students like you who are doing great and want to do even better at university. So thanks very much for tuning in, and don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks very much. Bye now.